The night was still in the Texas plains. Barbed wire gleamed faintly under the moon, and rows of wooden barracks creaked in the dry wind. Hundreds of German prisoners tried to sleep on rough bunks, their bodies still aching from transport across the Atlantic. They expected silence, discipline, and perhaps the grim echo of boots on gravel. Instead, a new sound cut through the air, soft at first, then swelling, until it pulsed with life. It was not the roar of artillery, nor the commands of guards. It was music, brass trumpets, the thrum of a double bass, the syncopated beat of drums. Jazz, Benny Goodman's clarinet solo, slid like silk through the camp loudspeakers. The prisoners froze. For men who had marched to the stiff rhythms of military bands, the swing was almost incomprehensible. One POW whispered, "Was ist das? What is that?" He had never heard such freedom in a sound. Another muttered that it must be degenerate American noise, the kind Joseph Goebbels had condemned. But the beat tugged at their feet all the same. What would you have thought if you were there? Surrounded by fences, and suddenly the night danced with music the Reich had forbidden you to hear. But what they saw next would break their certainty even further. Archival records note that by 1944, more than 500 camps across the United States housed German POWs. From Oklahoma to Louisiana, from Michigan to Arizona. In many, officers allowed music to drift through loudspeakers or radios. Some guards even organized concerts, bringing in local bands, according to quartermaster logs. Record players were distributed in certain camps to provide morale management. For Hans Keller, a 21-year-old Luftwaffe pilot captured in Tunisia. The sound of Count Basie's orchestra felt like an assault on everything he had believed. He scribbled in a diary, "This is not music. This is a strange fever. Yet it makes the men smile." He remembered how Goebbels had thundered against jazz as the jungle rhythm of the enemy. Yet, here, in the land of the enemy, it was played not as a weapon, but as ordinary entertainment. The prisoners argued. Some spat on the ground, declaring it poison. Others, curious, tapped their fingers against the bunks, drawn against their will. Beneath the bitterness, something stirred, an unacknowledged longing for joy after years of fear. And if joy could exist here, in a place of captivity, what might exist beyond the fences? But the shock of music was only the first crack. What awaited them on the screens of America would be even harder to dismiss. A week after the first night of jazz, the camp gates opened not for escape, but for entertainment. Guards led groups of prisoners into a rough hall where wooden benches faced a white sheet stretched across the wall. A projector rattled in the corner, throwing light into the dimness. For many German POWs, it was the first time they had ever entered what Americans casually called a movie night. The screen flickered alive, and suddenly the barren camp disappeared. A cowboy galloped across the plains, the sun exploding behind him. The prisoners blinked, mouths slightly open. In the Reich, theaters had shown newsreels filled with Hitler's speeches, parades, and carefully edited war victories. But here was laughter, romance, and adventure. The audience erupted in gasps when Clark Gable leaned in to kiss his co-star. Hans Keller scribbled again in his diary, "It is impossible. They laugh even in war." The women on the screen are not afraid. They shine like the stars above the wire. What would you have thought if you had been told all your life that America was crude and collapsing, only to see it sparkle larger than life before your eyes? But the illusions would only deepen when the curtain fell and the lights revealed another world. Archival sources suggest that by 1945, nearly every large POW camp in the US had a movie program. Army service forces distributed reels of films through the Special Services Division, not primarily to entertain prisoners, but because movies calmed men, kept order, and filled long nights. According to one report, screenings included everything from Gone with the Wind to B-grade westerns and comedies by Charlie Chaplin for the prisoners. Even the low American films seemed extraordinary. The sheer abundance shocked them: bright dresses, bustling cities, glittering cars. One recalled decades later, in Germany, the lights were out. In America, even in wartime, the screen showed electricity everywhere. The power of cinema was not just spectacle, it was contradiction. Nazi propaganda had painted America as a mongrel nation of crime and chaos. Yet on screen, the Americans were strong, kind, even heroic. The POWs found themselves questioning quietly which vision was real, the one taught to them in schoolrooms, or the one projected in light before their eyes. Hans Keller wrote, "If this is a lie, it is the most beautiful lie I have ever seen." And the question gnawed at them: if America had enough leisure to laugh in wartime, what else might it have enough of? The answer would come, not in silence, but in whispered debates after the lights went out. Hans Keller had been only 21 when he was captured in Tunisia in 1943. He had grown up in Hamburg, a port city battered by Allied bombs, where nights were spent under blackout curtains, ears straining for the drone of Lancaster bombers. His father had been a dock worker, his mother a quiet woman who hummed hymns when fear pressed too heavy. Like many boys of his generation, Hans had joined the Hitler Youth, then the Luftwaffe, believing the Reich's promise of glory. Yet his flight ended not in triumph, but in smoke, his Messerschmitt crippled. Spiraling into the desert sand, taken prisoner, he crossed the ocean on a Liberty ship under guard, now in a Texas camp. He listened to music his leaders had called filth and watched movies that painted America in impossible colors. Hans was no officer. He was not hardened by ideology like the political prisoners who still barked slogans behind the wire. He was young, impressionable, and curious. Through his eyes, the world shifted. Would you have clung to the old words of your leaders, or dared to wonder if freedom really sounded like jazz? Archival reports confirm that many German camps contained two kinds of prisoners: the true believers, often fervent Nazis, and the disillusioned majority who simply wanted the war to end. The first group enforced loyalty with threats, sometimes violence. Prisoners suspected of wavering were beaten, their diaries confiscated, their letters burned. Hans felt that pressure in his diary, smuggled under straw. He admitted, "When I tap my foot to the rhythm, I hide it. When I smile at the film, I pretend it is ridicule, but inside I cannot resist. I cannot." His barrack mate, Wilhelm, older and scarred, whispered warnings: "Do not let them see you. They will call you Verräter, a traitor. The Nazis inside this fence can be worse than the guards." Hans nodded. But the conflict raged. The music lifted him. The movies lit him with dreams he had never dared. Was he betraying his country, or simply rediscovering his humanity? What would you have done? Silence the rhythm in your chest, or let it carry you, no matter the cost? Soon, the very clash between propaganda and reality would break open, forcing every prisoner to confront what he truly believed. Every German prisoner carried ghosts of propaganda in his mind. For years, radio speeches had thundered about the decadence of the West. Posters had painted jazz as nega music, the rhythm of chaos, and Hollywood as a tool of Jewish corruption. Inside the camps, pro-Nazi prisoners repeated those lines like sacred verses. At night, they warned, "Do not be fooled by their tricks. The Americans want to poison us with lies." Hans Keller remembered those words as he sat on his bunk, still hearing the echo of Duke Ellington's trumpet. He told himself it was wrong to enjoy it. Yet the rhythm stirred something deep, something alive. Propaganda had said it was barbarism, But what he felt was joy. Which voice should he believe, the Reich's or his own heart? And if even music could not be trusted, what else of his upbringing might crumble? But the struggle sharpened when the moving pictures brought the contradiction into full, dazzling color. Archival sources describe how American camps screened films weekly, sometimes more. According to the U.S. Army's Special Services Division, over 1,000 reels were circulated for POW entertainment. Titles ranged from comedies like Abbott and Costello to dramas like Casablanca. For men who had spent nights in darkened, bombed cities, the brightness was overwhelming. Hans wrote, "In Hamburg, we huddled under blankets. On screen, New York never sleeps, her lights blazing even in war. How can both be true?" The propaganda back home had insisted that America starved, that its cities fell into riots. Yet the screen showed abundant neon signs, dancing crowds, lovers strolling through parks. Could so much light be fabricated? Could so much laughter be staged? Some POWs dismissed it as illusion, but others whispered that maybe, just maybe, it reflected a truth their leaders had hidden. What would you have thought if every picture contradicted what you had been told since childhood? The conflict spread, not just inside Hans, but across the barracks, where whispered conversations became sparks of rebellion against the Reich's story.
At night, when the lights dimmed, men whispered about what they had seen. One prisoner murmured, "If this is enemy propaganda, it is better than anything we were given," another said. "If they can waste electricity on films, what else do they have in abundance?"
But the true believers countered lies. Do not forget Stalingrad. Do not forget our duty. Fists clenched in the shadows, warnings passed from bunk to bunk. Hans lay awake, torn between fear of betrayal and the flicker of possibility. He thought of his mother back in Hamburg, huddled in a cellar. If she could see these films, would she still believe the Reich's words? The questions gnawed at him. They gnawed at many. For every man who resisted, another secretly tapped his foot to swing or dreamed of Hollywood's shimmering avenues. The clash of worlds would not end in silence. It would spill onto the pages of diaries and into dangerous conversations, leaving traces for history to find. By regulation, German POWs were allowed paper and pencils, mostly for letters home, but hidden among those letters were diaries, private notebooks that captured what the men could not say aloud. According to archival fragments, dozens of such diaries survived, later discovered in attics or donated to museums. They revealed a forbidden inner world. Hans Keller's diary was small, bound in brown cardboard, its pages cramped with hurried script. He wrote of the rhythm of Benny Goodman, of the flicker of Casablanca. He dared not show anyone. Yet the act of writing became a rebellion against silence. They told us America was chaos. He scribbled, "But I see order here. They said the people were weak, but I see strength in their joy." When the lights went out in the barracks, silence never lasted long. Whispers crept through the darkness, carried on the creak of bunks and the shuffle of blankets. Men compared what they had seen on screen, or how the strange swing melodies still rang in their ears. "Did you see the city lights in that film?" one voice murmured. Another replied, "They said America was starving, yet everyone was fat and laughing." Hans Keller listened, sometimes daring to join in. He confessed to Wilhelm, his older bunkmate, that the music felt alive. Wilhelm nodded, whispering back, "Yes, but keep your voice down. There are ears everywhere." And indeed, the true believers prowled. In some camps, prisoners who spoke too freely were beaten. American guards later reported that pro-Nazi factions created their own secret courts, condemning men who strayed from the party line. To doubt the Reich was to invite danger, even behind barbed wire. Still, the whispers spread. Each word was a spark, each question another crack in the wall of certainty. But sparks can become fire, and soon, even the censors could not smother the growing sense of doubt. According to US Army intelligence files, letters from POWs were carefully read before being sent to Germany. guards noticed subtle changes in tone instead of bitterness. Some prisoners wrote about the kindness of civilians, the strangeness of jazz, or the moving pictures that make us forget captivity. These letters alarmed Nazi authorities back home. Hans wrote carefully when addressing his family. "We are well fed. Sometimes there is music. There is laughter here." He never mentioned jazz by name, nor the films. But between the lines, his mother might have read more that her son was safe, and perhaps seeing a world beyond the one the Reich described. Inside the camp, Hans's private diary grew bolder. He described how the trumpet in Duke Ellington's Take the A train lifted the spirit, how Rita Hayworth's smile on screen seemed brighter than daylight. "If this is enemy culture," he wrote, "then why does it make me feel human again? Would you have dared to write such words, knowing discovery could brand you a traitor among your own countrymen? And yet, as dangerous as these whispers were, the world beyond the barbed wire whispered louder still. Even when the camp gates stayed locked, America seeped in through sound. Radios perched in guard towers or recreation halls spilled jazz into the air, sometimes on quiet nights. POWs swore they could hear broadcasts drifting from nearby towns, American announcers speaking in a language they barely understood, followed by music that pulsed with life. Hans Keller wrote, "I do not know the words, but the voices laugh. Even the announcer sounds free." According to US Army camp reports, local communities often volunteered to share music, sometimes donating records or inviting POWs to concerts, though barbed wire stood between them. The rhythms were impossible to contain. How would you have felt? Locked away. When every note from the outside world seemed to tell you that life beyond the fence was freer than the life you had left behind. But sound was only the beginning. Soon the prisoners caught glimpses of America with their own eyes. Many POWs were put to work outside the wire-cutting timber in Minnesota, picking cotton in Texas, harvesting sugar beets in Michigan, according to quartermaster records. These labor details filled critical gaps in wartime manpower. For Hans, assigned briefly to a farm detail, it was a revelation. He saw American families in neat houses, women driving tractors, children laughing as if war were far away. At lunchtime, the farmers sometimes shared food sandwiches, thick with meat, slices of apple pie, cold milk. Hans stared at the abundance. In Germany, his family rationed bread by the ounce. Here, food seemed endless. He remembered propaganda films claiming America was collapsing into chaos. Yet what he saw was order, prosperity, even kindness. One farmer's wife pressed an apple into his hand and said simply, "For you," Hans wrote later, "I wanted to cry. They called us enemies. Yet she gave me fruit, sweeter than victory." What would you have thought? Tasting kindness from those you were told to hate. And the more they glimpsed America, the more the Reich's image crumbled, piece by piece. Archival sources suggest that for many prisoners, the most powerful weapon America wielded was not its tanks or planes, but its ordinary life. Jazz on the radio, movies on the screen, food on the table, all of it painted a picture of freedom far stronger than any speech. Hans Keller reflected in his diary, "The Reich told us America was dying, but here, even in war, life grows. They have enough strength to laugh, enough courage to play music, enough hope to dream on a screen." The guards noticed the change. Some prisoners asked questions about democracy, about elections, about why African-American soldiers served in the same army that produced Duke Ellington's records. The contradictions were confusing, but also revealing America was not perfect, yet it was freer than the world they had known. And as the war dragged on, these glimpses took root inside the prisoners, planting doubts that would outlive their captivity. By 1945, the war was turning against Germany. News filtered into the camp's Allied advances, bombed-out cities, the fall of Berlin drawing closer. The Reich's certainty shrank with every bulletin. Yet, inside the camps, another battle had already been fought. Not with rifles, but with rhythm and light. Jazz had crept into the bones of prisoners. Hollywood had flooded their imaginations. And together they had done what bombs could not make them question. Hans Keller wrote, "I once believed the Reich was eternal. Now, even as I sit behind barbed wire, I see how fragile it was. It feared a trumpet, it feared a laugh on a screen, perhaps it feared freedom itself." Would you have admitted the same if your whole life had been built on that illusion? But the war's end would soon force every prisoner to carry those questions home. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the United States held over 371,000 German prisoners. Repatriation began slowly, with groups shipped back across the Atlantic. Many went not straight home, but first to Britain or France, where they were forced into labor for months, even years. But no matter the detours, each man carried invisible luggage memories of swing, of pie shared on a farm, of Rita Hayworth's smile on a flickering screen. Hans was among them. On the voyage back, he hid his diary deep in his pack. He wondered if he should burn it, but he could not bring himself to do it. Those pages had become his truth. He feared what awaited in Germany's cities in ruins. A people broken. And the ever-present question, what story would he tell? The seeds of doubt had been planted, and once planted, they could not be uprooted. Decades later, historians interviewing former POWs found the same theme repeated. Men recalled not just the food or the safety of captivity, but the culture they had absorbed. One remembered hearing Glenn Miller for the first time and thinking, if this is the enemy, then I have been lied to. Another said Hollywood films gave him a vision of life not controlled by fear. For Hans Keller, who returned to Hamburg to rebuild a shattered life, the music never left. He kept a small gramophone, playing swing records quietly in his apartment long after the rubble was cleared. To him, jazz was more than sound, it was a memory of awakening. And so, behind the barbed wire, ideology cracked. The Reich had collapsed not only under Allied armies, but under the weight of its own lies, exposed by the irresistible pull of music and film. But the story does not end with Hans, it ends with a truth that reaches beyond any one man. History often measures victory in battles won and cities captured. But there are quieter victories, invisible at first, yet just as decisive. For German POWs in America, the true shock was not the guard towers or the fences, it was the jazz that swung through camp loudspeakers, the Hollywood reels that painted a world of laughter and light, according to archival records. Thousands of prisoners admitted, later in life, that these cultural encounters changed them. They saw abundance where they had been told there was only poverty. They saw freedom where they had been promised chaos. And they felt joy in rhythms once branded degenerate. For many, this was the beginning of doubt, the recognition that the Reich had lied, that its fear of music and movies was not about corruption, but about control. After all, what ideology is strong if it fears a clarinet solo? What power is secure if it trembles before a film projector? Hans Keller, like so many others, carried that realization back to Germany. Thus, in the ruins, it became a seed of something new. Perhaps that is why, in the decades that followed, jazz flourished in Europe, and American films filled theaters from Hamburg to Munich. The rhythm and the light had leapt across oceans, surviving barbed wire and suspicion, carried in the hearts of men who had once been enemies. In the end, the collapse of Nazi ideology was not just written in the ruins of Berlin, but in the memories of men who had tapped their feet to forbidden music in captivity. It was a reminder that true strength is not only measured in weapons or armies, but in the power of culture, freedom, and humanity